The bullet had taken a piece of him. Cade Hawk Reynolds knew he was a dead man. The cold seeped from the forest floor into his bones, a deeper chill than the autumn air. The posse had been relentless, and the lead slug buried in his side was his prize for being a fraction too slow. Blood, warm and sticky, soaked through his shirt and leather vest, a dark blossom in the moonlight filtering through the pine canopy. He could smell the iron tang of it, mixed with the scent of damp earth and his own sweat. He'd managed to drag himself off the trail into a thicket of brush, hoping the wolves wouldn't find him before the dawn did. His vision swam, the edges darkening. This was a hell of a way to go out, not in a blaze of gunfire, but bleeding out alone in the dirt like a wounded animal. Then he heard it. Not the crunch of a boot or the snort of a horse, but the soft, hesitant rustle of fabric. A scent cut through the metallic odor of his blood, lavender and simple soap. He forced his eyes open. A silhouette stood over him, backlit by the moon. Not a man. A woman. She was holding a basket, her face pale and wide-eyed in the gloom. An angel of death or salvation. He tried to speak, to growl a warning, but only a pained gasp escaped his lips. "Oh, heavens," she whispered, her voice like the gentlest of streams. Cade expected her to scream, to run. Instead, she knelt beside him, her skirts pooling in the dirt. Her hands, small and cool, touched his forehead, then moved to the wound. He flinched, a jolt of fresh fire racing through him. "You're burning up," she murmured, her touch surprisingly firm as she peeled back his blood-soaked vest. "And you're losing too much blood." "Posse," he managed to grit out. "Leave me." "I cannot," she said, her voice resolute. "To leave a man to die is a sin." With a strength that belied her delicate frame, she hooked her hands under his arms. "You must help me. There is an old trapper's cabin nearby. Can you stand?" Somehow, fueled by a primal will to live and the surprising command in her gentle voice, he managed to get his feet under him. Leaning heavily on her, he stumbled through the trees, each step a fresh agony. He was twice her size, a mountain of muscle and pain leaning on a sapling, but she bore his weight without complaint. The cabin was a single room, dusty and forgotten, but it had a roof and a cot. She half dragged, half pushed him onto the rough-hewn bed. The world swam in and out of focus. He felt her cut away his shirt, her fingers probing the wound with a clinical gentleness that was both excruciating and reassuring. "The bullet is still in there," she said, her breath a warm caress on his skin. "I have to get it out." He nodded, clamping his jaw shut. He'd endured worse. She rummaged in her basket, producing a small bottle of whiskey. "This will hurt," she warned. "Just do it," he grunted. She poured the liquor over the wound first, the burn making him arch off the cot with a choked curse. Then he felt the cold touch of a knife. Her sewing knife, he realized. He focused on her face, on the way her brow was furrowed in concentration, her full lips pressed into a thin line. Her golden hair, escaped from its bun, curled around her face like a halo. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, this angel of mercy in the middle of his hell. The pain was blinding, a white-hot explosion as she dug for the lead. He blacked out for a moment, and when he came to, she was pressing a clean strip of cloth torn from her own petticoat against the wound, her small hands applying steady pressure. "It's out," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're going to be all right." For the first time in a long time, Cade almost believed it. Days blurred into nights. She came every day, bringing food, water, and fresh bandages. She told him her name was Elara. He told her his was Cade, shedding the fearsome mantle of hawk. She was the schoolteacher's daughter, he learned. A woman of faith and books, a world away from the dust and blood of his own life. He was a captive audience, and she was his keeper. And somewhere in that quiet, hidden cabin, something began to shift. The conversation started as polite necessities. You need to drink this broth. Thank you. Then they became something more. He found himself telling her about the sky in Texas, the way the stars looked with no towns for miles. She told him about her father's books, about her dreams of seeing the ocean. She didn't ask about his past, and he offered nothing, but the unspoken truth hung between them. He was a man on the wrong side of the law. He watched her move around the small cabin, the sway of her hips, the graceful curve of her neck. He was a man who took what he wanted, but with her, he felt a strange, unfamiliar reverence. The desire was there, a constant, low thrum in his blood, but it was tempered by something else, awe. One evening, as she was preparing to leave, a storm broke outside. The wind howled, and rain lashed against the cabin walls. You can't go back in this, he said, his voice rough. He was sitting up now, his strength returning. I must. My father will worry. Elara, he said, and the way her name sounded on his lips, a prayer, a confession, made her still. Stay. Just until it passes. The air in the cabin crackled. The space between them on the cot seemed to shrink. He could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of her throat. She was afraid, but not of him. She was afraid of the thing growing between them, the same wild, untamable thing that was taking root in his own chest. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. Her eyes, the color of the summer sky he'd just described to her, were wide and searching. You saved my life, he whispered, his thumb stroking her jawline. Anyone would have, she breathed, but her words held no conviction. No, he said, leaning closer. Not anyone. Only you. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a conflagration. It was weeks of suppressed desire, of gratitude, of a connection so profound it defied all reason. He poured everything into that kiss, the loneliness, the violence, the sudden, staggering hope she had ignited in him. Her response was hesitant at first, then fervent. Her hands came up to clutch his shoulders, her lips parting beneath his, allowing him to deepen the kiss into something desperate and hungry. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing as if they'd run for miles. The storm raged on, but it was nothing compared to the tempest inside the cabin. I have to go, she whispered, her voice shaky, her lips swollen from his kiss. He didn't stop her. He just watched her flee into the rain, knowing that the wound she had left in him was far deeper than any bullet could ever make. The next day, the cabin was empty. He was gone. All that remained was a St. Christopher medal, his mother's, left on the cot where she had nursed him. A piece of his soul, left for the woman who held his heart. 5 years later, the town of Silver Creek was prospering, and Elara was its crown jewel. No longer just the schoolteacher's daughter, she was now the fiancée of Sheriff Miles Thorne, the man who had tamed the lawlessness of the territory. He was handsome, respected, and built the town's first proper church for her. Their wedding tomorrow was the event of the season, a symbol of a new civilized era. But as Elara stood for her final dress fitting, the silken lace feeling like a shroud, her mind was a world away, in a dusty trapper's cabin. "You look like a vision, my dear," Miles said, his voice smooth as polished oak. He stood in the doorway of the dressmaker's shop, his badge gleaming. He was perfect. Too perfect. His smiles never quite reached his cold, gray eyes. "Thank you, Miles," Elara said, forcing a smile of her own. For 5 years, she had tried to forget Cade. She'd buried the memory of his kiss under prayer and propriety. She'd accepted Miles's proposal because he was safe. He was order. He was the antithesis of the dangerous, passionate man who had vanished from her life, taking a piece of her soul with him. The church bell began to toll, not its usual gentle chime, but a frantic, alarming clang. Clang, clang, clang. "The Hawk!" A voice shouted from the street. "Hawk Reynolds and his gang are riding in." The blood drained from Elara's face. The world tilted on its axis. Hawk. The name was a legend, a whispered nightmare used to scare children into obedience. The most notorious outlaw in 3 territories. And she knew his real name. Miles's face hardened into a mask of grim determination. "Get to the church and lock the doors," he commanded her before striding out, his hand on his gun. Peering through the shop window, her heart hammered against her ribs. Elara watched them ride in. A dozen men, hard-faced and dusty, led by a figure on a massive black stallion. Even from a distance, she knew him. The years had carved him out of granite, made him broader, harder. The boyish shadow of Cade was gone, replaced by the formidable reality of Hawk. But it was him. He didn't look at the bank. He didn't look at the saloon. His pale blue eyes, sharp as shards of ice, scanned the terrified crowd and then locked, with unerring accuracy, on the dressmaker's window. On her. He dismounted with a predator's grace, his men fanning out behind him. The street was silent, save for the nervous stamp of a horse. Sheriff Thorne stood his ground, his posture rigid. "Reynolds." Miles spat. "You've got nerve showing your face here. The gallows has been waiting for you." Hawk ignored him. He took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, his spurs jingling a death knell. His gaze never left Elara. "I've come to settle an old debt, Sheriff." Hawk's voice rolled through the street, deeper than she remembered, rougher. It was a voice that promised both violence and protection. "I owe the lady a life." Elara's hand flew to her mouth. The air left her lungs in a rush. He'd come back. For her. Miles spun around, his confused, furious eyes darting between Elara and the outlaw. What is he talking about? Elara couldn't speak. She was trapped in Hawk's gaze, a bird mesmerized by a snake. He was a storm, and the careful, orderly life she had built was about to be swept away. Hawk took a job at the Miller Ranch, the one on the outskirts of town. The whole town held its breath, waiting for the robbery, the shootout, the chaos. But it never came. Hawk worked. He broke horses with a raw, innate skill that was mesmerizing to watch. And every day, he found a way to be near her. He'd be at the general store when she was buying supplies. He'd be watering his horse at the creek when she took her evening walk. He never approached her, never spoke. He was just there. A constant, brooding shadow, a living reminder of the wildfire that had once burned in her blood. It was driving her mad. It was driving Miles mad with a cold, possessive jealousy. One afternoon, cornering her in the church as she arranged flowers, Miles gripped her arm too tightly. "Stay away from him, Elara. He's a cancer. I will cut him out of this town, and if you stand too close, you will get hurt." His words were a warning, but his eyes held a threat. For the first time, Elara saw the rigid control for what it was, a cage. That evening, desperate for air, she walked to the creek. And he was there as she knew he would be. Elara. Just her name. It was a caress and a demand. She turned to face him. "You shouldn't be here. You should have stayed gone." "I tried," he said, stepping closer. The setting sun set his face in sharp relief. "For 5 years I tried. But a man can't outrun his heart. And mine has always been right here with you." "I am to be married tomorrow," she said, her voice breaking. "To a man who sees you as a prize. A symbol. I see you, Elara. I see the fire you try to hide. I remember the taste of you." His voice dropped to a husky whisper. "I remember the sound you made when I kissed you." His words were a physical touch, unraveling her. She could feel the heat of him, smell the familiar scent of leather, horse and pure, unadulterated man. The memory of their kiss, of his hands on her, crashed over her, drowning out the voice of duty. "Why now?" she begged, tears in her eyes. "Because I'm not the same man who left you in that cabin," he said, his gaze intense. "I've spent 5 years building something honest, far from here. I came back to offer it to you. Not to take you, Elara. To ask you." He wasn't the outlaw claiming his prize. He was the man, offering her his world. The last of her resistance crumbled. He closed the final distance between them. This kiss wasn't like the first, born of desperation and surprise. This was slow, deliberate, and devastatingly skilled. It was a kiss of possession of 5 years of longing. His tongue swept into her mouth, and she met it with her own, a low moan escaping her throat. His hand slid down her back, pulling her flush against the hard, unyielding planes of his body. She could feel the powerful evidence of his desire pressed against her belly, and a corresponding heat pooled low in her own. This was not the chaste, proper peck Miles had given her. This was a raw, carnal promise. This was sin, and it tasted like salvation. They broke apart, breathing raggedly, foreheads pressed together. "Meet me tonight," he breathed against her lips. "The old livery stable. Midnight." Before she could answer, before she could think, he was gone, melting back into the twilight. Elara stood there, her body humming, her lips swollen, her fate sealed. She knew then, with a terrifying, thrilling certainty, that she would be there. The wedding dress hung like a ghost in her room. At 1:45, Elara slipped from her house, her heart a wild drum in her chest. The town was asleep, but the livery stable was awake with the soft sounds of horses and the scent of hay and leather. A single lantern cast a golden, intimate glow. He was waiting, leaning against a stall, his powerful arms crossed. He didn't smile. His eyes burned with a blue fire that scorched her to her soul. "You came," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I couldn't stay away," she admitted, her own voice a whisper. He pushed off the stall and was before her in 2 strides. "This is your last chance to walk away, Elara. Go back to your sheriff. Your safe life. I won't stop you." She reached out and placed a trembling hand on his chest, over the solid, steady beat of his heart, right over the scar her hands had tended. My safe life is a prison. You are freedom. A low growl rumbled in his chest. That was all the encouragement he needed. He captured her mouth in a kiss that was pure, unadulterated hunger. It was a kiss that laid waste to her doubts, her fears, her promises. His hands were everywhere, not with the clumsy, entitled gropes of other men, but with a confident, worshipful possession that set her skin on fire. He backed her against a stack of hay bales, the rough texture a stark contrast to the velvet of his mouth on her neck. I've dreamed of this, he muttered against her skin, his hands working the buttons of her dress. For 5 long years I've dreamed of having you under me. Her dress pooled at her feet, followed by her petticoats and chemise until she stood before him in only her thin cotton shift. The cool night air kissed her skin, but it was nothing compared to the heat of his gaze. You are more beautiful than my dreams, he breathed, his eyes devouring her. He shed his own clothes with swift, efficient movements, and her breath caught. The boy she'd nursed was gone. In his place was a man carved from marble and sinew. His body a map of a hard life, scars silvered in the lamplight. And he was fully, powerfully aroused. He laid her down gently in the soft hay, covering her body with his. The weight of him was intoxicating, anchoring her to this moment, to this sinful, glorious choice. Are you sure, my Elara? He asked, his voice thick with a need he was barely restraining. In answer, she wrapped her legs around his hips, pulling him closer. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He entered her in one slow, inexorable thrust. There was a brief, sharp pain of surrender, and then fullness, completion, a feeling of coming home she had never known was possible. She cried out, not in pain, but in wonder, her nails digging into the hard muscles of his back. He stilled, letting her adjust, his face a mask of agonized pleasure. God, Elara, you feel like heaven. Then he began to move. It was a primal, ancient rhythm. He was not a gentle lover. He was acclaiming. Each thrust was a promise, a vow, a brand. He kissed her, drank her moans, his hands gripping her hips, guiding her, teaching her the cadence of their passion. The world narrowed to the scratch of hay on her back, the smell of their mingled sweat, the sound of their ragged breathing, and the overwhelming sensation of him moving inside her, filling her, completing her. She met his intensity with her own, her hips rising to meet his, her abandon matching his control. A coil of pleasure tightened deep within her, winding tighter and tighter with every powerful stroke. She was flying, falling, shattering. Cade! She screamed his name as the coil snapped, sending waves of pure, blinding ecstasy crashing through her. Her body convulsed around his, milking his own release. With a final, deep thrust and a guttural roar that was part triumph, part prayer, he poured himself into her, his big body shuddering with the force of his climax. For a long time, they lay tangled together in the hay, their hearts beating a frantic, synchronized rhythm. He held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. His lips pressed to her hair. "You're mine now," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Always." The next morning, the church was packed. Elara stood at the altar, not in her wedding dress, but in a simple blue day dress. Miles, handsome and furious in his suit, stood beside her. The trial of Hawk Reynolds was a foregone conclusion. Miles had produced a witness and a stolen wallet, planted evidence for a crime everyone knew Hawk didn't commit. "Hang him!" Someone shouted from the crowd. The judge prepared to pronounce the sentence. Miles allowed himself a small, cold smile of victory. "You cannot hang an innocent man." Elara's voice, clear and strong, cut through the murmurings. She stepped forward, away from Miles, towards the shackled Hawk. The entire town gasped. "Elara, be silent," Miles commanded, his face purpling. She ignored him. She looked at Hawk at her Cade, and saw the love and faith in his eyes. She turned to the crowd, holding up the Street Christopher medal she had kept for 5 years. "This is his," she declared. "The man you call Hawk left this with me 5 years ago when I saved his life. The man you call your sheriff is a liar who would hang an innocent man to possess what he could never truly have, my heart." She turned to Miles, her voice ringing with a power he could never understand. "And you cannot marry a woman who loves another. I saved his life once. I won't let you take it now." The church erupted. In the chaos, Hawk's men created a diversion. The doors burst open. Hawk, with a strength that seemed superhuman, broke the flimsy ropes binding his wrists. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the defeated sheriff. He looked only at Elara, his hand outstretched. This was her choice. Without a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and sure. He pulled her to him, crushing his lips to hers in a brief, searing kiss that was a vow for all to see. Then, hand in hand, they ran. They ran out of the church, past the stunned townspeople, into the bright, free morning. He lifted her onto his black stallion and swung up behind her, his arms a solid, safe cage around her. As they rode out of Silver Creek, leaving the prison of propriety behind forever, Elara leaned back against his chest, his heartbeat a steady rhythm against her back. She was not an outlaw's captive. She was a woman who had chosen her destiny. She had chosen the wound and the wildfire. She had chosen the hawk, and in doing so, she had finally learned to fly.